In this video we're going to look at the multiple choice paper for June or summer of 2011 and what I've suggested you do is find the questions that you struggled with, pause, replay and use it however you think is going to help you for your overall revision. Question 1 starts with a nice, fairly straightforward production possibility question. We're given a starting point to work from, so the country is currently producing at this point here, and if it decides to increase fruit production, we're going to move along the fruit axis towards this point here. So the question is, what's the opportunity cost? What are we giving up in wheat to get the extra fruit? So here's the reduction. So the opportunity cost must be this level JK. Question 2, I've highlighted the key term, so the key syllabus area, which is to do with positive or normative statements. If you go back to Unit 1, Week 1, you remember that normative statements are statements usually of opinion that cannot be tested. So if we look at the option, there's a number of statements of fact. The only one that cannot be tested and therefore is normative is D. Some people would agree with it, other people won't agree with it. Question 3 is the first application of demand and supply. I've highlighted the fact that this is about a merit good. So remember, merit goods, governments would generally want to try and increase consumption because of the desirable properties of merit goods. So the question here is about which is the correct policy. The way to approach it is to look at the original equilibrium point at Q1 and to look at the new equilibrium point which we're going to move towards at Q2 as it tells us in the question. So we need to increase the quantity demanded and supplied. So the policy that will do that, I'm just going to add on a second supply curve. So when we shift policy that shifts supply curve to the right is a subsidy, and the subsidy per unit that the government will pay is always the vertical distance. So the answer to question 3 is B. First thing to do in question 4 is to identify the correct elasticity. So inferior goods relates to income elasticity of demand, so we can knock out A and C straight away. And an inferior good, by definition, has an income elasticity of demand that is negative. So as income rises, the demand curve would shift to the left. Question 5 is a question to do with the importance of using money in a developed economy. You see this question every so often. So money is a medium of exchange. It just allows us to exchange in shops rather than having to barter and swap. Usually, medium of exchange relates to concepts of division of labour and specialisation. Two ways to look at this. One is to make the link between money and allowing the benefits of specialisation to get the option D. Alternatively, we could have a look at the other statements and eliminate them. So money won't allow an economy to operate outside its production possibility boundary. That's nonsense. We don't know whether or not money will increase the production of public goods. There's no necessary link there. And clearly money won't prevent market failure. So by elimination, again, the answer is D. Question 6 is about using economic data or interpreting economic data. So in order to answer this question, I wouldn't consider the options. I'd just focus on the table of information first of all. So I've covered up the options. Right, this is about percentages. So we cannot tell anything about actual values, it's percentages of total income. And it's about the poorest groups in society, the bottom 10%, and the richest groups in society at the top 10%. And a key word here is the word income. And income to an economist, it's mentioned 1, 2, 3, 4 times in the data. So just watch out for that when the options come up. So let's look at the options now. First of all, I'm going to rule out option C straight away because it uses the word wealth. And remember, this is all about income, so that goes. Next, I'm going to rule out option A. The reason being that I don't actually know what the total amount of income is. I only know the percentages. So I cannot tell anything about whether income has fallen or risen. And for the same reason, I'm going to rule out option D. So the only thing that we can really say from this data is the distribution of income, the difference between the poorest and the richest. The distribution of income has moved more towards the rich, so therefore the distribution of income has become more unequal, and later on we'll look at that as a market failure. Question 7, I've just drawn a quick sketch just to illustrate to myself what a relatively price elastic supply curve would look like. So it's relatively flat, and in the short term there's no increase in the size of the business. So this is, for example, within one business or one industry without new businesses coming in. What this says is, as prices rise, firms in the industry can significantly increase the output. So the option that is available is that if firms are operating below their full capacity at the moment, it means that they can increase output if required in the marketplace. So the option is B. 8 is a question to do with understanding your market failures. So market failures relate to, in this instance, a missing market. So the market will not produce a good at all. So the only situation where there is a completely missing market is in the instance of a public good. Remember, the reason it isn't option C is because the market can provide a merit good. So question 9 again, I've covered up the options. I want to focus on the economics of it rather than the guesswork. So let's eliminate that. So first of all, look at the clues. So we've got an increase in demand happening for this product. The product's organic apples, that might be important later on. And what we're being asked to do is make some conclusions about what happens when the price rises from 100 to 120. So generally, if there's numbers given, even on a graph like this, then you're probably going to be expected to use them in the answer. So one of the things I'm guessing before I look at the options is it might be asking me to look at the reasons for the shift in demand as a possibility, but I think it's more likely it's going to be interested about the response in supply in relation to changes in price. So we're probably going to be looking at the price elasticity of supply. The percentage change in price is dead straightforward. So price changes from 100 to 120. So there's a 20% change in the price, and we're interested in the response to that change in price. The percentage change in quantity supplied then is the change on the x-axis of 20 divided by the original. So remember, the starting point we always go back to is 50 and multiply it by 100, which will give you your percentage change of 40%, and it's a positive. For an increase in price, there's an increase in the quantity supplied, so the firms are responding to the opportunities to make profit. Hopefully you can see why I covered up the options before I looked at solving the problem, because some of these statements look to be correct, so there's a number of distractors in here. Let's take one that we can definitely eliminate. We can definitely eliminate B. because we're moving from one equilibrium to a new equilibrium. We can also eliminate C because the price elasticity of demand for organic apples is negative, because you can see there's a downward slope according to the law of demand. So you might be asking, why isn't the answer D? Because with a luxury product or a superior product, you would expect there to be an increase in demand, a shift to the right in demand, so that part's okay. But in order to work out whether organic apples are luxury goods, we need to have some information, because it's asking us about income elasticity of demand. If you look in the scenario, there's no reference to income elasticity of demand. So if we go back to our calculation, the price elasticity of supply of organic apples, well, there was a percentage change in quantity supplied, if you remember, of 40%, divided by a percentage change in price of 20%, both positive, which gives us the answer positive 2. Question 10 is worth a little sketch. So remember, an indirect tax on production would shift us from S1 to S2, and I've now drawn the answer. The only situation where there's no effect of an increase in tax, and this is a theoretical example, is where the price elasticity of demand for the product is perfectly elastic. And if you notice, the quantity changes, but the price in this instance is unchanged. So the answer to question 10 is C. Question 11 relates to the concept of economies of scale. Remember, as firms increase their output, it allows them to reduce their average cost or their cost of production. So we can rule out B. We don't know whether it's going to make a change in the market, so I'm probably going to rule out A. Economies of scale don't tell us anything about the demand curve, so the answer to question 11 is D, because if there's a reduction in the average costs, it's ultimately going to shift supply curve from S1 to S2. Question 12 is quite scary looking at first glance, but the examiners are moving in this direction, so it really requires you to have a good understanding of the underpinning concepts. In this case, it's cross-elasticity of demand, and it says the cross-elasticity of demand is negative. Products that have negative cross-elasticity of demand will be complementary, so complements. So what we should see with a complement is that there will be an increase in demand as a result of a fall in the price of one product. So the answer to this one is A. As a follow-up, it might be worth trying to identify what would explain options B, C, and D. So 13 is another number-based question. And given that there's some data and percentages already available, you're probably going to need to use your calculator. I've underlined the fact that it's PED because we've got a change in price up here, and as a result, a change in quantity. So using the numbers, I've just calculated the price elasticity of demand for richer groups, which produces an answer of negative 0.15, which is therefore inelastic. And now for poorer groups, which is 20 over 40, but remember the fall is 20, so it's negative, which produces a coefficient of negative 0.5, so still again inelastic. So overall the conclusion is that the demand for beer is inelastic for both groups of consumers. Question 14, you just need to read it extremely carefully, because some of the statements are completely wrong. So the fundamental economic problem, scarce resources and limited wants, well no, because it's unlimited wants. Unlimited resources and many wants, well clearly that's untrue. Provision of goods with no opportunity cost, well that's not fundamental to economics, because that's to do with free goods rather than economic goods. So at the centre of economics is the idea of a trade-off because of the problem of scarcity, so the answer is B. The way to approach a question like 15 is to work around each option and see whether there are logical links going from left to right. So if we take the first option, a missing market, so I'm thinking straight away that's to do with public goods, where the market cannot provide. Well, clearly it breaks down here because the market can provide healthcare. So if we move on to option B, positive consumption externalities is produced by education, and the policy to correct the market failure will not be imposing a minimum price. It would actually be state provision of schools, so I'm going to eliminate B as well. If we take option C, merit goods, well, merit goods will produce positive externalities in consumption. Clearly petrol doesn't. It produces negative externalities in consumption and also probably in production, so I've ruled it out. So by doing it in that way, I'm just going to check negative externalities in production are generated by through electricity, and one of the policies to deal with that is the policy of pollution permits. So the answer is D. Here's another government intervention question to deal with the problem of agricultural prices and agricultural incomes for farmers. So the government's going to set a minimum price up here at P2, and as a result of that we've got a disequilibrium in the market. We've got this gap in the market. So now the farmer is receiving, in terms of what's sold in the market, you can imagine this area of revenue, so the red box, but given the government support they're also going to receive a subsidy, so the government's going to buy all the surplus, which includes now the green area. So the answer to question 16 is A. It's the outer area, the whole of the revenue box, which is price times quantity. Question 17 is another calculation. It's price elasticity of demand. The first thing I would always do when I look at the diagram is cover up the options and then just draw an arrow to indicate to myself where do we start from and where do we finish. So the starting point is a price of 80 and a quantity of 100, and as a result of the increase in supply, price falls and the quantity responds in that way. So take that percentage change in price first of all. So the starting point is 80 and there's a reduction of 20, so the percentage change would be minus 20 over 80 times 100, which gives us a fall of 25%. Percentage change in quantity is going to be starting at 100, increasing to 150, so there's a difference there of 50 over an original of 100. This time it's positive, so we've got when we change it into a percentage, we've got a 50% increase in quantity as a response. So popping the numbers into my final formula, I've got 50 divided by 25, negative 25, which should give me negative 2 as a response. So therefore the answer is C. Now there's a lot of work to be done there, which means you really need a strong understanding of the calculation and lots of practice. 18 is another market failure question, but again in a slightly different way. So it requires you to have a good understanding of private and external costs and benefits. And the example that they're using here is a coal-burning power station. So I need to know what a social cost is. Remember, a social cost is the private cost or the marginal private cost with the external costs added on top. Similarly, a social benefit is the private benefit plus the external benefits on top. And to calculate the answer, we simply take the social benefit and this away from the social cost, which should give you, if you work through the numbers, should give you the answer of £40 million. Another market failure question with a policy. So the diagram shows a market for rental accommodation. The market equilibrium in this market then is going to be at PQ as normal. The government or the policymaker has decided that price or that rental price is too high, so they've imposed this maximum price here, which of course produces a disequilibrium in the market. And this question is really about the unintended consequences of a policy. So you can see, therefore, at the maximum price, there's been a reduction in the supply of housing by that distance there. So there's been a decrease in the amount of accommodation available by there. And the reason for that is that private landlords just decide not to put their properties up for rent at that lower price. There's an unintended consequence. Probably the easiest question on the paper, but again, I've underlined the keyword, so it's asking for the reason why governments intervene, and clearly the reasons why governments intervene is to do with the externalities. The others might be relevant issues to other questions, but they don't answer the question. Another calculation question, I've underlined the fact that this is unitary price elasticity of supply, so that means we're looking for the firm where the PES equals 1, so again it's another theoretical question. What information do we know already? That there has been a 20% increase in the price as it's changed from 50 to 60, and that's true in every situation. So what we're looking for is an increase of 20% in terms of goods supplied. Don't need to be a major mathematician to work this out. Here's the 20%. So the answer to this question is C. 22, just got to read it very, very carefully and identify what you can establish. The only thing we can definitely establish in a marketplace is that prices do not always reflect the social cost, because there are, by definition, market failures. The way to answer this question, it's quite a complex question, is to take imaginary positions like position 1, position 2, and at each of these positions it's certainly true, it's only true, that the marginal social cost is greater than the marginal social benefit. So if we look at the curves themselves are diverging, they're moving in different directions. Question 24 again requires a little sketch by the side. So what I'm saying is, a small firm is able to buy any amount, so it can increase its demand, and that's not going to alter the price. So if I shift demand curve to the right, or even if I shift demand curve to the left, the price remains the same. So the answer is C. Final question, I've covered up the options again. Looking at the scenario, we've got a situation where the original equilibrium, which is H, has been moved to the new equilibrium as G. So there's a leftward shift of supply as a result of a flat rate, because it's a parallel shift, so it's a flat rate tax, shifting the supply curve to the left and therefore increasing the overall price and clearly reducing the quantity available in the market. So the question is asking us about the per unit tax. So if you look back to the similar question earlier in the paper on subsidy, for these questions you're always looking for the vertical distance, so the answer is going to be GJ, answer A. So hopefully you found this talk through, this tutorial useful. Again, it's going to be available all the time through Moodle and YouTube. Keep working through the difficult questions and get into the habit of using the methods that I've been trying to explain to you. Best of luck.